thank you very much for your time today in joining us on this review of websites within Singapore. In a little while, I'll share a presentation, but just to introduce myself, I'm Richard, and I'm Chief Digital Officer at Black Sun. And so really just responsible for all of our digital work that we do for clients across the globe. So predominantly kind of European and APAC listed organizations. What I'm going to do now is I will just share the presentation and then we can get going. While I'm doing that, if there's any questions and so on that you would like to ask, then feel free to use the chat function at the bottom or questions messaging, and I'll come to you. I'll either do it as we go along or I'll try and keep an eye on the questions and then come back to it at the end. The presentation is designed such that obviously you can ask questions as we go through, but I've also left a bit of time at the end if anybody has any questions. Okay. What we're looking at today is an agenda where I'll just give you a brief introduction to Black Sun. Some of you may not be familiar with us, particularly our digital work, so I thought it'd be useful just to spend a couple of minutes on that literally. And then we'll share what it is that we assess in terms of our website benchmarks, why we do it, the importance of it, kind of things that we look for. And then what we'll do is share some trends and best practice examples with you of things that we've seen in the APAC market, but also we can talk to the wider kind of, I guess, global context if anyone wishes to ask questions around that. So in terms of Black Sun, for those of you not familiar with us, we're an international stakeholder communications company, so really helping organizations better connect and engage with their different stakeholder groups, whether that be kind of investors or employees, prospective employees, wider society and so on. We have basically three key areas of our service suite, which is stakeholder reporting, so annual report, corporate report, sustainability reports, and so on, sustainability communications and campaigns, and of course, digital transformation. And really what we look to do is to help really spark greater stakeholder engagement through our digital experiences. You'll be delighted to know I won't go through all of these services in detail, but just to give you an idea that we provide a full range of digital services right through from strategy consulting, design, content, to designing, building, hosting, managing corporate websites for our clients. So just to give you a quick snapshot, we look after corporate websites, some of the best known brands, both in Europe here and of course in Asia and Singapore. We also do online reporting for our clients where we're producing the annual report, of course. But we also do B2B websites. This one is an example that we do for Inmarsat, which promotes all of their global products, services and solutions across the globe. And careers site, this one being for Imperial Brands, which we both do in Europe and of course in Japan where they operate also. And finally, we do internal communications. The one on the right there is an intranet that we do for one of our clients, and internal communication and news there on Coca-Cola Hellenic on the left there. So enough about us, but hopefully that gives you a really good context of what we do with a digital lens. And clearly as an organization, we do, well known as well in Singapore for our corporate reporting and annual report work. What we're going to cover today is basically a review of the websites that we've done in terms of the SGX, so the top listed 30 within the Singapore Exchange. If we look at some of the challenges, it's really why do we do this? I think what we're seeing across the globe is, trust largely continuing to fall, although interestingly, businesses are often more trusted than other organizations. We're seeing an increasingly active stakeholder base, sustainability massively topping the corporate agenda, which is clearly one of the themes that comes through on the website reviews. Got an intense battle for talent, and of course, accelerated by COVID, real seismic shift to digital. I think obviously digital provides a unique opportunity to engage and connect with different audiences. And particularly own channels like a corporate website really allow businesses to directly communicate their value creation story. And we know that digital communications affect investment decisions, reduce the cost of capital, helps attract talent. And also, the latest trends from people like Gartner in their global assessments are, that increasingly even B2B transactions will be online, so 75% within 5 years. So, probably goes without saying to this audience on this call, clearly a critical channel. But even some of the research on shareholders and analyst investment decisions say that the website can shape their decisions, can help them be more persuasive in their investment decisions, perhaps particularly if they're less familiar with the organisation. They're just doing an assessment of the stock. And also, we're seeing obviously ESG and sustainability are crucial in the investment decisions. And this is information from PwC in their global research around how ESG and sustainability can affect investment decisions. And of course, it's critical for talent. And again, this is one of the big trends that we've seen over the last 18 months on corporate websites, going from a bit of a brochureware around kind of the career story, being much more active way of attracting, engaging and recruiting prospective employees. Increasingly today, obviously 80% or so of employees are really looking for organizations to join that whose values are aligned to their own. And of course, 75% of workers expect their employer to be a force for good, which is clearly affecting kind of content and narrative. And that's reflected through on things like as well the Edelman research, which clearly articulates how employees are looking for their CEOs and leadership team to make an active contribution to society and positive force for good. So what we analyse is we look across all of the FTSE 100, and I won't cover that data today other than just a couple of highlights. What I really want to focus in is what we saw in the top 30 on the Singapore Exchange. We look roughly at about 150 or so metrics. And we also use analytics to kind of weight and calibrate some of the, the weightings and scoring that we have. And I'll come back to that later in the presentation as to how we use that information. But I thought it'd be useful just to share what we assess. I often get asked this, and because this is the first kind of webinar we've done within the Singapore market, what I've done on the next few slides is just to give you a little bit more information on the types of things we look at within each of these areas. I thought that would be useful for people, in terms of setting up the benchmark and so on. So in terms of what we look at the corporate narrative, and that's things like, how well the kind of strategic kind of story is told, objective strategy, KPIs of financial performance. The investors, we'll talk about in a short time, but that's really around, how well it meets the investor audience needs, like investment case, results reports, and so on, as you'd expect. And then the same for sustainability, media, and careers. But as I say, I'll show you a little bit more detail as we go over the next few slides. And the experiential score is really around, do you have a distinctive creative identity? Is it a creative consistency and modern palette? Is the site usable? Does navigation work and function well? Does it meet regulatory requirements around things like cookies and so on? And can you easily find and access the content that you need to through the site? So just to canter through this, really the corporate narrative, as I say, is really just assessing how well a business communicates what it does and who they are through the site. So we're looking at things like purpose, corporate profile, strategic intent, the value creation through the business model and so on, and how well governance is explained. We're also seeing on investor relations, how well the investor relations narrative is connected. Is there a clear investment proposition or investment case? Increasingly, ESG is rising up the agenda, as you all know. So again, we look at that in some detail, along with the financial information, results and reports, and all the good, solid content investors need to access day by day. In terms of the sustainability area, again, looking at the sustainability narrative, is it clear on what the approach and the strategy is, what the focus areas are? Is it well governed? How does the governance, what board oversight is given? Are reports, data and insights provided? And also increasingly is, news, shares and outcomes and case studies provided, just to make sure that we're not kind of greenwashing the sustainability narrative. And I think, again, that's one of the trends that we've seen over the last year or so. Companies are really trying to communicate well their actual impact on society and long-term sustainability as a whole. For careers, as well as the overall kind of employee value proposition narrative, we look at how well organizations look to talk about attracting talent, building trust through, talking about culture and values and diversity and inclusion, what the working life is, perhaps doing, employee profiles, and sharing career information about, what the progress and development, learning and development opportunities, pay and benefits, and so on. So again, just a rich and rounded review of careers sections. Media, perhaps one of the lightest areas. Really here, we're just looking at, is there up-to-date and current news, information and stories? Are media resources, perhaps, like board pics and profiles provided, or downloads of fact sheets and so on? And is it easy to access and see some of the social channels that obviously interconnect with corporate websites increasingly these days? In terms of the experience, as I mentioned before, these are the types of things that we look at within the experience analysis. And I think it's probably safe to say that corporate websites are increasingly moving from, dare I say it, static library of content 3 or 4 years ago to being much more kind of active, imaginative, experiential destinations of today. Now, I mentioned earlier on around analytics and how we use that. I mean, clearly we only have access to a certain suite of analytics. But clearly what that helps us do is to really understand across corporate and listed sites in particular, what drives recency and frequency, which tends to be the live content like the news, share price, and so on. The narrative content, which tends to drive dwell time and page views. So that's things like, your strategy or, what your overall purpose is and so on. And then there's evergreen content, which is really driving utility, access to, corporate reports, ESG insights, and so on. So we use that and we look across all of the sites and aggregate the data such that, for example, you might look at investor priorities. So our analysis and scorecard looks across these items on the top half, which is things like, the investor narrative, as I said before, financial information, news results, and so on. And what the analytics allows us to do is to see what drives frequency of visit, which is things like the results announcements, report, share price type content. What they spend time reading and dwelling on, watching videos for, which is things like, the annual report, the results presentations themselves, have some of the financial numbers. Whereas they also cross-link into other priority areas of the site for them. So getting a quick glance at the company, who the board and leadership are, recapping on purpose and sustainability and so on. So that's quite good for us to help shape some of the scoring around the, what the overall narrative should be and so on. So that's how we use analytics to calibrate our scoring. So it's more than a lab exercise. So I thought it would be useful to share some of the kind of key findings. And I thought I'd start by giving you, I guess, what we see internationally, so across the different, if you like, geographical footprints. And I think overall there are 3 key trends. Firstly, being much more purpose-driven, i.e. more purposeful content. I'll come to that in a minute. It may sound a bit odd to be audience-centered, but we do see a lot more emphasis by organizations really trying to create a narrative for each of the audiences. So careers would really introduce kind of the purpose, the employee value proposition, good cross-linking to the sustainability narrative, because that's really important to those particular audiences, interconnecting perhaps at a glance the organization so it's easy to understand and so on. So that's what we mean by that, really making sure that each area kind of has curated content to meet each of those key audience needs, save them perhaps, or make it easy for them to spider across the site. And experience enriched, what we mean by that is, much more engagement, use of video, interactive elements, ambience, little features to communicate unique points of difference. So really trying to catch up in terms of perhaps what's happened in the consumer world, with the experiential delivery. And some stats that kind of match that, if you just look at some of the purpose-driven narrative, we're seeing now organizations, perhaps a little bit more within the European sphere, I guess. I'll show you the Singapore specific scores in a minute. 84% now of organizations have a clear statement of purpose. Half of those are really dedicating pages and content to bring that purpose to life. And that might be insights and blogs. You've got people like AstraZeneca that have their whole kind of research library to reinforce what they do, have Rolls-Royce and innovation and so on. So a real greater effort to bring that purpose to life and communicate the power of that, but then to carry that purpose through the rest of the audience groups, whether that be clearly linking and driving corporate strategy, whether it's, driving the investment case of the investor section, and also attracting new talent within careers. So it's a growing trend across the globe, I would say, to have a clearer purpose-driven narrative. In terms of the takeout for the top 30 within Singapore, there are three trends that I think we've kind of noticed, or three things that are really coming to the fore. I think the first is that connection with purpose, perhaps a little less so than in other kind of regions. I'll share some stats in a minute. Secondly, sustainability clearly is an absolute kind of priority and focus, and I'll share how we've seen that through the analysis that we've done. And of course, attracting and retaining talent. So let's dive into a few of those, and I'll show you some examples of that later on in the presentation. So in terms of the group, perhaps a little less clarity around purpose than, say, within the European territories, but still at 34%. That's much higher than it was, say, a year ago. And what we're also seeing is connected with that narrative, organizations are much more prominent around sharing their values and behaviors. So almost 70% of those, articulate those clearly, either within the kind of corporate narrative or within the kind of careers and people areas. There's a real effort to communicate unique points of differentiation and also clarity around strategic priorities. So this isn't just the strategy, it's actually what their strategic priorities are. And in many cases as well, they have metrics that underpin those. And just over half are, placing greater emphasis on sharing governance structures and processes to make sure it's really clear how the organization is run, managed, and overseen as a whole. And just to give you that comparison with the more global kind of footprint, then that's what the larger global operating companies are seeing in terms of the purpose, which I showed you earlier. In terms of the sustainability focus, what we're seeing here is much more focus on tangible objectives and targets. So 70% of organizations are giving clarity on their sustainability objectives, like what they want to achieve, and 52% are then giving very specific targets, i.e. X by Y date. And about a third of organizations are then providing performance data. As yet in the Singapore market, there aren't kind of data sheets where you can kind of go through and play with charts and graphs and so on and so forth. But to be fair, even globally, that's very low. But again, I would just reinforce the point that greater transparency, if you like, on sustainability is rising up the agenda. Second strand within sustainability is clarity of the priorities. So 80% or so describing the key focus areas for their organisation, 70% going into specific sustainability governance narrative, and 40% have sustainability committees. So actual committees set up to specifically oversee sustainability. And again, globally as well as locally, that number was much lower 18 months ago, probably about, I think it's about 15% or so had that in place at that time. And finally, as I said, to mitigate the fact that it's just all talk and no action, we are seeing growth in showcasing the actual outcomes and impact on society as a whole with a long-term sustainability strategy. So nearly 40% have actual case studies on the work they do. And 55%, actually, that's really high within Singapore compared with other markets around sustainability news, which is really great because it just shows and evidences outcomes. In terms of attracting talent, again, we're seeing good narrative around why should work for the organisation. Just over half are talking about diversity and inclusion and wider kind of cultural fit and so on, which leads nicely onto the second point. And you can see there how organisations are talking about their values, their culture, and also the kind of the people profiles to try and bring the organisation to life. And you'll see right at the beginning, one of the key things that's driving talent and attraction of talent is, prospective employees are looking for organisations that match their own perspectives, values, and outlook on the world. And finally, of course, connecting with new talent. So again, nearly 2/3, or 60% anyway, are speaking to specific audiences. So that might be grads or interns or experienced hires. 62% are promoting current vacancies, and 55% are enabling applications. Now, to be fair, I think the Singapore market has been ahead of other territories in using the corporate website to drive recruitment. But again, it's a rising trend as the battle for talent hots up. So I thought it might be interesting to show some examples, and a couple of these I'll click through to on the site so you can just see how they work. Just thought it'd be quite nice to bring some of these to life. So this is an example of SDN Engineering actually, just really, this is an example of where they've got clear communication of their purpose and what their aspirations are, linking into their values, and explaining those in a little bit more detail underneath there, you can see that. What also we noted around this site in particular, which we are seeing a lot of trends around, is it appears to us that they've got this area around innovation, which obviously plays back directly to the fact that they're harnessing technology and innovation to enable a secure and sustainable world. So organisations are increasingly using content and areas of the site like this to reinforce that purpose. And you see that within this site, you see it within, say, things like Anglo American, where they've got a whole smart mining, future of mining piece, and to reinforce their purpose. There's an innovation, interesting section within Rolls-Royce that reinforces the purpose they have for the world. So this really is a big trend within organizations to find ways to really bring their purpose to life and reinforce their competitive advantage over other organizations. The other thing I thought would be quite nice, I might actually link through to this. So hopefully everyone can still see my screen. So this is the careers area for SC Engineering, and it's quite a nice site. So bringing to life a little bit more about the organisation, as I say, kind of the culture and values and so on that we saw before. Bringing in some of the job openings, as I mentioned earlier, to attract the right talent. And compared with a lot of sites within the Singapore market as well, it's got quite a nice little area of bringing their kind of people stories to life. So each of these are a little profile of somebody in a different role that just tells a little bit more about the opportunities within the organisation, what's happened to people and how they've developed and so on. So it's just nice, little video clips and so on. So it's quite a little rich little area for people to navigate through and just understand a bit more about the organisation. And again, globally, we see this kind of content driving dwell time. Actually, people do watch those videos and engage with them. But also good ways of bringing the organisation to life, as it were. The other site that I thought was quite interesting in that kind of connection of narrative and so on is SAPS. Again, you can see their kind of introduction of the purpose their connection with communities, which is quite enriching content. And they have a pretty good sustainability section as well. So you can see it just when that loads, I'll share it with you. So again, quite a good sustainability narrative outlining their belief. Nice kind of easy navigation access towards future destinations, awards and achievements and so on. And how it connects with their overall business strategy. So again, each of these connect through, learn more areas. Chief Sustainability Officer introduction, and then obviously the journey to 2023. And it's quite nice having these little in-conversation elements with members of the senior staff, as it were. So here's an example of his kind of profile and Q&As in effect. Just a nice way of bringing that to life a little bit. This one I thought it's not within a kind of corporate side as it happens. It's actually within the review, but I do really like the way this whole page works. So this is within the Temasek review. What I particularly like about this is the way Temasek have crafted the the narrative around their purpose, and it's a really engaging and interactive experience. So as you scroll down, obviously you've got the ambient video in the background there. There's a really good use of video to introduce kind of the challenges. And the way they've set this up, living in a world of crisis, they're talking about some of the key trends and numbers of lives claimed and so on. So setting up, if you like, the challenge. Good interactive elements here within the page. Quote from obviously the chairman and some of the kind of what they're now doing to help solve some of these huge challenges that face. Again, just things like this really help engage users and drive dwell time on the site. And then as you go down, obviously it's just some really sweet little interaction pieces here and ambient type videos, elements within it as you bring through. But what they're trying to do here, obviously, is set up the challenges, and then what makes a better world. So some examples of what they've done around store the value, restoring insight, the next generation, and so on, and bringing them to life with videos. And obviously the closure of together we can make a difference, of bringing it all back together at the end. So just a nice way of using modern digital techniques to tell a narrative around a core purpose. That's why I wanted to share that particular example with you. And then other sites obviously are looking at just features and interactive elements around describing their kind of unique difference, as it were. This is just one of the more complicated ones that we've seen within the SG Max market, and where it's obviously just communicating the different products and services and so on within that market. Another emerging trend, I know this isn't a Singapore pure company, but I wanted to share a couple of examples with you that are perhaps a little bit more kind of global in nature. And given the priority and focus around sustainability across all companies, frankly. This is quite an interesting example, and if you get a copy of the prayers, then all these images are linked across to sites. I won't go to this because it just it plays sound, which obviously will disturb your viewing experience here. But what it does is it promotes or explains some of the challenges around palm oil, and obviously everyone's familiar with some of the challenges that provides in terms of sustainability and farming practices and so on. And one of the dilemmas that they present the user is actually whether the smaller farmers should be cut out of the supply chain. And the reason being is they tend to follow less around best practice and sustainability adherence and so on. What they do is present the options to you, get you as the viewer to decide which option to do, yes, exclude them, no, make an exception. And when you've chosen that, what they do is present some of the impact of the decision you've made. So in other words, well, yes, you can exclude them, but that means they'll still be on the market. You've got less kind of, if you like, control or influence on what they're doing. So actually, you're not improving the overall environment. Whereas no, make an exception, well, actually, how are you then going to improve their practices and bring them more to kind of where it need to be? So it's it's a small gamification, if you like, of challenges, and they do that with other sustainability topics. And we're seeing about, I suppose, about 20% or so of companies starting to use these types of techniques to help engage the audience further. There's one with KLM and what they're doing in terms of airlines and what the airline is doing, what society can do, and what you as the user can do, which just helps bring together that to life. So just really looking at different ways of engaging users and so on, which is driving engagement on the site. And there are also some areas in careers areas, so perhaps doing psychometric little online assessments of what role suits you and so on to help bring career stories to life. So I just really wanted to kind of recap, I guess, on what we've seen, which is globally we're seeing a much more purpose-led articulation and narrative across the corporate stories. Globally, we're seeing much more kind of audience-centered narrative, richer experiential design through the corporate websites, catching up with perhaps some of the other websites, consumer world websites. Within the Singapore market and the top 30 listed companies, we're seeing a much more kind of coherent and stronger narrative, much more purpose-driven in the sense that it's a much more connected narrative. And really trying to communicate the great work on sustainability, both in terms of the specific objectives, making sure it's clear what the approach and material issues are, and communicating the outcomes. And then finally, obviously, trying to win the battle for talent, recruiting the best talent, really communicating the culture, the values, the people profiles, the opportunities that the company provides. So hopefully that kind of gives you some insights into into what's going on within the Singapore market. We we are very happy to do both summary reviews and full reports if you'd like your website assessed. We can do a high-level assessment, which gives you a review of how you score against average. We can also include how you stack up internationally. And what you'll get is a summary of each of those areas and also some recommendations of what we would suggest for your website and how you can make improvements. And also there is an option to have a kind of named peer review. So many of our clients ask to be compared with 3 or 4 of their direct competitors or peer group, where we can highlight perhaps what peers do better, or perhaps where your advantage is versus them. So do reach out if there are anything that we could help with within that regard, or if you'd like more detail on what we've assessed and some of our conclusions. In the meantime, I will look to see if we've had any questions through the chat. Are there any questions, or do feel free to ask in the chat or QA and so on. If there are any questions you have around some of the assessments that we've done or some of the examples that we've given. Excellent. Well, that was a little bit quicker than I thought it might be. But as I say, thanks for your time today and attention on what we're seeing within the Singapore top 30 companies. As I say, if you'd like any information, we'll share the presentation with everyone that's attended. And if you'd like more information or more deep dive on some of the examples or assessments you're in, do reach out. There's a question coming in. I'll just. Yes, we will. Well, we'll share this deck, and if you'd like more detail around some of the findings and so on, then very happy to share that with you. So no problem at all on that front. That's a cracking question on DNI. So Josh has asked. I don't know if everyone can see this, so I'll read it out. In terms of careers, hearing from new joiners that diversity and inclusion is actually a deciding factor, or whether it's just a trend because it's the right thing to do. I think the answer is yes and yes. I think there are a lot of sites that we see where the diversity and inclusion content is more geared, or the narrative is written to meet, dare I say it, what we should write, and the regulatory requirement, for want of a better term. So I think there is quite a lot of that within corporate sites that we see. However, having said that, what we're seeing both in research on new prospective employee work that organisations like CPD do and so on, is that employees are definitely looking for organisations where they feel there's a strong cultural fit, where the values match, where there are people like them and a really sense of belonging. And I think actually in some, I guess, of the more forward-thinking sites, we're seeing the diversity and inclusion content remarshalled and articulated in that lens, so that it is much more around there are people like you, and here are our kind of values and how we approach and how we do business and so on, that actually builds more of affinity and attracts that type of talent. So I think the answer is, as I say, a bit of a mix of yes and yes to your question, Josh. Excellent. Okay, well, that's all the questions that have come in. As I say, do reach out if there's anything else that you would like to hear or more information. Very happy to share that with you. Very happy to share going through your individual websites if you would like. Just reach out. I'm very happy to help. Many thanks for your time today.